Hi, everyone. This is Megan.
And this is Steven.
And this is the Synchrony podcast where we talk about transforming apostolic dating culture and ending loneliness in the church. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Or Monday, if you're listening to this when it drops.
Yeah.
Or Sunday night, because sometimes we get excited and drop it early.
Yeah. Like, oh, we're done editing. Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah. This has been a really fun week. We had another engagement.
Woo!
Yay! Congratulations.
Yeah, I was saying we haven't even put it on socials yet.
No, it'll be up by the time this goes out.
That's true. That's true.
Big congratulations to Lorraine and Adrian.
Y'all, congrats. It was a beautiful engagement from the photos, by the way.
Yeah, so excited for them. They met a while ago and they have a cool story, and I'm just really excited for them. Both absolutely on fire for the Lord and serving in ministry. And I will say, it was delightful to get that engagement the week after we released our stats recap podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Because in our stats recap, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. We kind of do a deep dive on the stats that we've collected so far. I mentioned that men in their like late 30s to early 40s is a place where we've traditionally lacked, or I said early 40s to mid 50s, I guess, where we've lacked a lot of respondents.
Yeah.
But these guys sort of fall into that area, and they're beautiful, and they have a beautiful family, and I'm just so excited for them.
Yep. Congratulations, y'all.
Yep. Yay. We're going to have to start, like, I don't know, putting, like, tick marks on the wall or something.
Have, like, people's faces.
Yeah, just a picture board. I like that.
Or you just do old-fashioned, like, tally marks.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like, hash,
Yeah, I know.
you know, like scratch with a stick.
Yeah. Drywall.
Yeah. We have an interesting topic tonight, and I'm nervous about it. So I'm going to delay it a little while longer and use this as an opportunity to talk about our partners at Cafe 117.
I'm covering the logo, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, Cafe with a K, KAFFE 117. They are an apostolic-owned coffee company. If you haven't heard us talk about them, then you haven't listened to enough Synchrony podcast episodes. But they are delightful people who make great coffee. You can get your premium single origin coffee or blended coffee on subscription, shipped right to you, roasted to order. And if you use the discount code that we gave you down on the bottom in the description, you can get it at a little discount.
That's right.
So go get some coffee. Enjoy.
Please do.
Okay.
So what's funny is I know we talked about two different topics.
Yeah.
And I still don't remember which one we nailed down. So this is kind of a surprise for me, too.
Oh, well, you're going to know as soon as I start talking about it.
Oh, sure.
So this is a topic that I have been wanting to talk about for a very long time. I'm trying not to sound so excited. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time because it has felt like like burden's not the right word, but just like I felt it hanging over my head. So this is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a long time and have been afraid to.
Yeah.
Afraid to, both because it is a sensitive issue and because it's sensitive for me. So I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of a trigger warning. And if you're a person that thinks trigger warnings are for sissies, then you don't have a disordered eating problem, and I'm happy for you. But this is something we're going to be talking about, body weight. We're going to be talking about body shape and things like diet culture. And if that's something that you've struggled with in the past, if you have issues with it, we would be more than understanding if you didn't listen to this episode. That's totally fine.
Yep.
Because it can be a real problem for a lot of people.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So we're talking about fat. And I'm specifically using the word fat on purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be very intentional with my language in this episode. I'm not going to beat around the bush and talk about plus-sized people or curvy people or heavy people. I'm going to talk about people living in fat bodies, because there's all kinds of language that we use to try to sanitize this issue and make it feel more comfortable for everyone.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, this is an uncomfortable topic for most people. So what we're going to talk about are dating challenges and just the dating landscape for people who are living in fat bodies. because dating in a fat body is different than dating in a thin body.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so everyone's got their seatbelts on, put on their big boy pants and big girl skirts, and we're ready to forge ahead, right?
Coffee in hand.
Coffee in hand, ready to go.
Sorry, I made that face because my throat did a weird squeaking noise.
It's fine. Sounded like you had a rubber ducky stuck in there for a second. Um, so when I meet with people for their consultations, I ask about their preferences, their physical preferences, right?
Yep.
And I generally think people are very transparent with me and very honest with me. And one of the things that we talk about most consultations is preferences around a potential partner's body type, body shape,
Yeah.
right? And it's always a very difficult conversation because I can see people getting nervous about how they express their preferences. And so it's very clear from the way they talk about their own bodies, from the way they talk about other people's bodies, that talking about fat and fat bodies and the shape of a fat body is something that we have been really trained not to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to talk a little bit about the culture around understanding fat in Western society. And when I say Western society, what I really mean is European and American driven cultures. Western culture exists all around the world, right?
Oh, sure.
Because you go to Dubai or you go to Tokyo or Hong Kong and you're in a non-Western geographic location, but Western culture has permeated there,
Yeah.
right? Um, so when we say Western, we're talking about, you know, sort of Eurocentric culture, driven by cultural trends in the United States and Europe and Canada, the Western world, that's then flowed into other parts of the world through globalization, right? There is a lot of data, good data, well collected data about body type preferences for members of the opposite sex in Western culture. So, just thinking about that, what's your guess as to what the majority of people prefer in terms of the body type of their dating partners in a spectrum of fat to thin?
Oh, I mean, what all magazines and media sells us.
Right.
Then.
Right. Thin preference is huge.
Yeah.
And it goes deeper than just like what's in the media and what's on magazines, right? There have been some interesting research about cultural ideals around fat over time. I read a really interesting little mini article. There's a whole book about this from a professor at, I want to say, University of Kansas, I think. But he writes about fat in Western culture, starting with Greco-Roman culture, or
Oh,
even
okay.
like before that. And in Greco-Roman society, there was a thin preference because there started to be a focus on like things like self-discipline and exercise, in stoicism, in sort of self-control as an indicator of health and goodness and virtue, and also very idealized bodies in terms of, how they were portrayed in art and Greco-Roman architecture and art. And so Greco-Roman culture started to differentiate fat and thin bodies where trim, muscular, very athletic bodies were preferred. And it also had to do with the fact that they were conquering cultures
Mm,
where fat bodies were preferred.
yeah.
So they were conquering some cultures in Africa and India where that culture preferred a fuller body. And in order to distance themselves from that, right, fat bodies became associated with people who were enslaved and people who were potentially illiterate, who weren't participating as Roman or Greek citizens, and white or light skinned, very trim and athletic bodies started to become the preference. Um, And so we see that trope very early on. I didn't actually know that that started way back when, but that idea has funneled in and out of Western society. And we've certainly seen preferences for lean versus fat bodies shift over time.
Yeah.
So the takeaway from this is that cultural ideas about fat come and go.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of variability and variety. What research has shown, and I've actually got studies on this, so I'll link what I have, what I pulled in the show notes below. But studies tend to show that in resource rich countries, meaning countries that have a high level of wealth, abundant access to food, that thin bodies are preferred. Whereas in resource poor countries, fatter bodies might be preferred.
Yeah.
Really interesting. There are actually cultures in, I want to say sub-Saharan Africa, or maybe getting more into the Middle East. I'd have to go back and look. A nomadic culture where young girls are actually force-fed as preteens, to the point where some young women unfortunately have died, as a way to fatten them to make them more eligible for marriage, because fatness is considered to demonstrate prosperity, health, fertility in
Yeah,
that
sure.
culture. So, thin preference is a Western concept, but it is very prevalent and has been with us for a very long time. It's not something brand spanking new or that showed up in the 1950s.
Oh, sure.
So it's been with us for a long time. As when you were, do you remember like growing up, were you aware of the pressure to be thin? Was that something that was part of your day-to-day life?
Um, Thin, maybe, but I was always very active in sports. So the people around me were naturally like more lean.
Mm.
And I did wrestling in high school where
Mm.
they were to an unhealthy level, like putting trash bags on themselves and running around the track before a wrestling meet in the middle of South Florida,
Oh, trying to trim
trying
down?
to cut down weight because they were a couple pounds overweight.
Yikes.
Yeah, so there's kids that had like died, not my school, but like in wrestling, the wrestling world, people have died because of doing it too much.
Trying to get into the right weight class.
Right into yeah, exactly. And so
For people who don't know wrestling, you might have to define that a little bit. Like, you have to, in order to compete within a certain grouping of athletes,
yeah,
they separate it by weight class, and you have to be within the weight class in order
if
to,
not, you won't be able to wrestle at that meet.
right. And so you have to meet your target weight, but it's
But
kind of,
but if you do go up to the next weight
Mhm.
class, you're at a severe disadvantage because
if you don't weigh enough.
yeah, if you don't weigh enough, because now there's a 15-pound difference between you and the next
Right.
guy.
It's better to be, I assume, at the very top of your weight class than the
Mhm.
very bottom of the next
Yeah,
one.
just it gives you a little bit of edge.
Yeah.
So that being said, I was excited when I hit 7% body fat, like, but that's just because I was outside all day working out with my wrestling buddies and then on the weekends playing ultimate frisbee with my youth group. So
Yeah.
like I was always outside and I had a young metabolism where I was just always doing stuff.
Yeah, you're natural, and I think like you're naturally on the more slender side. You were you were a quick growing kid, right? To
Uh
a degree.
yeah. I mean, again, I've been in sports since I was 5.
Yeah.
So it's like
Active,
yeah.
all those things.
If not younger. But that being said, you know, once once I hit like my late 20s and I stopped going outside as much and I started gaining weight naturally as a progression because I'm eating the same amount or more than what I was before.
Hmm.
Also unhealthy drinks. And so
Like sodas, not
oh
like
sorry, yeah, not alcohol. Like lots of soda, lots of like energy drinks and stuff like that.
yeah.
So liquid calories. But
We got away from my original question, which was, were you aware when you were young about the pressure to be thin?
yes, but for different reasons. Because of wrestling.
Oh, you felt pressure to be thin because of your sport.
It wasn't
specifically.
thin, it was within my weight class.
Right. Okay.
Which again, I tried gaining weight as a teenager and it was hard for me.
Sure. I think in some ways, and not every person is like this, I think there is a gender dynamic to that, because
Oh, sure.
as a young girl, I was very conscious about weight and the need to not be fat from a
Yeah.
very young age. And you and I have talked a lot about this. This is something that I've struggled with. I've struggled with some disordered eating stuff as a result of this. Like I had a um, very toxic relationship with fat, with my body, with food that I'm still in the process of kind of figuring out, like starting to come around to knowing how to kind of manage this better. But so I was aware of thin preference from as early as I can remember. And my awareness of that came from how the women around me talked about other people's bodies. It came from media, right? Um, it was very clear if you think back to like 90s sitcoms
Yeah.
that in a lot of those it was totally fine if the main character, the male main character was larger, right? It was not okay for his wife to be larger,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and so the Atkins diet was like the rage in
Yeah.
when we were in like elementary and middle school.
Yeah.
My family went through a series of consecutive diets that started when I was probably around 12. Um, and I was not a very active kid, in terms of physically. I had a series of surgeries and I wasn't active. So I struggled with my weight and with being fat, um, from the time I was about 8 on.
Yeah.
So fat has always been very visible in my mind, right? On both my relationship with it and fat in the larger world. And I remember it being really, really troubling to me when I started dating and taking interest in guys. Um, because I felt like I had to compare the amount of fat on my body to the amount of fat on the bodies of girls around me in order to know if I had a chance. Um, and this is, a very unhealthy outlook on dating that I really cultivated as a teenager,
Yeah.
right? Very much dating for validation and not dating for values
Yeah.
or, you know. So,
I do have something I want to add going back to
yeah,
me, but I want you to finish your thought first.
that was pretty much it. I was just going to say that, like, I think for some people, particularly for women, although not exclusively to women, fat and thinness preference has been a very big part of our life and our awareness of our social experience, right?
Yeah.
But what were you going to say?
I was thinking about it. I actually had a little bit of the opposite experience in the
Mm.
sense of I never felt big enough.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Especially from a guy's perspective. I was
Mm-hmm.
like my nickname from like some family friends when I was younger, I was Woody.
Like
Because
the Toy
yeah,
Story
like
character.
the Toy Story character, because I was always a beanpole.
Mm.
Um and so when I got into wrestling, like I was proud that like I was tone, but tone is anyone can be tone if you're emaciated. Like, you know,
If you have no body fat,
yeah, that's what I'm
then
saying. If
yeah,
you have no body fat, you see muscles on your body. So it's one of
right.
those things. Is like I was proud that I could see muscles, but it was very easy to compare myself to the people around me who were benching more, who had
Mm-hmm.
bigger shoulders, better looking backs, and like you're working out with your teammates. So like you're
Sure.
seeing all of the older classmen, the way they look, and you're comparing yourself to them. So um, I never felt like I was enough in that area until I learned to realize that that's not as important. Like, don't get me wrong, being healthy is, but not for a specific muscle shape.
Sure. And that's the thing I want to call out too is like we're going to be talking about sort of this from our perspectives, but the things that make people struggle with their body image apply to both men and women, right? Body dysmorphic disorder, which is the sense that it is a literal inability to see the reality of your body's shape,
Yeah,
right? And to understand it, most of the time it is that you've developed an idea that your body is not something enough, not thin enough, not muscular enough, not tall enough, whatever. And no matter how much closer you get to the ideal you have, you still can't see your progress. And it shows up in guys,
oh yeah.
and it's led to things like, guys who have suffered really terrible um, muscle injuries due to overworking out or due to use of steroids because they're trying to achieve an ideal.
I mean, even the fillers.
Oh
Those
yeah.
guys that use fillers to achieve a plastic surgery look.
Yeah, bigger muscle tone.
When it just they never stop doing it, they keep on
Right.
adding more, and it looks unhealthy
And
by
of
the
course
end of it.
there's a whole industry around making women's bodies thinner,
Sure.
sculpting your body
Yeah.
surgically, all the different waist trainers and shapers and things that you can put on your body to change its shape.
Yeah, you can add and take away however you want to nowadays.
Right. And what the research shows in terms of people's preferences, we're going to shift and talk about, the the landscape for how people prefer dating partners. Most research will show that the majority of people prefer a specific body shape. So the majority of men supposedly prefer sort of an hourglass body shape with that type of waist to hip ratio, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the exact ratio is. I think it's like, I don't remember. It might be like a 70% waist to hip, right? So your waist is like 30% smaller than your hips.
Sure.
Um,
I doubt there's guys out there with measuring tapes, but like,
no, but so
I know it's probably done with research, but
yeah, anthropologists argue that that's sort of, there's an argument that that's sort of innate, that's where humans across the board, and I'm skeptical of this because I think it dismisses cultural implications for
oh,
this,
sure.
but they would say that that's a waist to hip ratio that connotes in our like primate brains like that person is a healthy weight and probably fertile, like because that entails a certain degree of body fat. You do have to have some body fat to have that ratio, generally speaking,
Yeah.
but not a significant amount.
Yeah.
And women prefer men that are V-shaped, right? Broad shoulders and a very small waist,
Yeah.
right? The extreme image of this is Michael Phelps, who looks just like a massive triangle. Um, not that he's necessarily,
with orangutan arms.
yeah, not that he's necessarily an icon of attractiveness, but that's sort of the extreme
Yeah,
shape
sure.
that women sort of supposedly in the research are aiming for.
With Michael Phelps, I've always imagined him like dragging his knuckles on the ground.
Yeah,
Like not
not in like a not in a way
no
to connote anything about his intelligence. His
no
arms
no
are just
no
so
no. His
stinking
arms are
long.
so long. It's like, and nothing against him. I mad respect the guy, but I just like he just has such long arms. It's so funny.
The shelves he must be able to reach.
There
As
are no shelves untouched
yeah, as a woman who's 5'1",
except for the ones on the bottom shelf.
yeah, to lay down on the floor. Um. Anyway, so that's what the research says about what most people prefer.
Yeah.
But we need to appreciate that all, when researchers talk about what the majority of people prefer, they're almost always talking about some kind of a bell curve,
Oh, sure.
right? And when I say bell curve, this is like if you were to plot everyone's preferences on a graph, it would look like a handful of people over here on one side that prefer an extreme of this, a lot of people in the middle that prefer sort of something in the middle, and a few people on the other end that prefer something toward the other extreme, right? So to say that most people have thin preference or that our culture as a whole has a thin preference might be true. It does not mean that everyone in our culture thinks the same way about bodies.
Yeah.
Or that they are attracted to the same type of body. It does mean that there are overarching trends. Now, here's where it gets difficult. Okay. I found a statistic that said, and I don't remember what year this was from. It might have been from like a 2013 or 2014 study. So this is pretty outdated now, right?
Yeah.
But at the
A whole
time,
10 years old now.
yeah, at the time it said that 70% of American women wear a size 14 or above, right?
Okay.
A size 14 would be considered like an extra large in
Yeah.
like just basic sizes, right? So that is a person who is probably considered overweight by, and when I say overweight, I mean just by like the sort of standard medical diagrams that you're going to see at your doctor's office, right? So 70% of women,
Regardless of race.
regardless of race, are in larger bodies, are in bodies with more fat
Yeah.
than is preferred at a high level.
That's
Right.
that's it's mind blowing in the sense of knowing the culture.
Yeah. So think about that when it comes to dating. If the majority of the population prefers what only 30% of the female population can offer, then that 70% of women is then left with a very small group of potential partners who prefer their body type, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing happens for men, right? If women prefer men, and the standards are a little bit different, right? Women tend to prefer men who are tall and who are broader, but women also express preference about the amount of fat someone carries.
Yeah.
Right. So when our cultural standards of attractiveness only correspond to a very small part of the population.
Sorry. And hair.
Yes, women tend to prefer men with hair. That's true.
That's
Don't
something you forgot to mention.
don't leave out our beautiful bald guys. That can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
And 100% in the dating space. Completely agree. Guys, if you're losing your hair, you're beautiful. Don't worry about it. 25% of men are balding by age 21.
Yep.
Which is a wild statistic, but I
Yeah.
found that in actual data at some point too. So anyway, all that to be said, what this creates is a disparity in the number of potential partners who fit our culture's norms of attractiveness compared to the number of available partners that are looking for someone. I know I just spoke a lot of statistical gobbledygook.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to try to clean the slate of all that and boil it down to some basics.
Okay.
Dating is harder for fat people and people living in fat bodies. It just is.
Yeah.
There's no softening that, I don't think. It does not mean that if you are in a fat body, this does not mean that you are not attractive. It does not mean that you aren't deserving of love. And it does not mean that you cannot have a beautiful relationship with someone who finds you attractive, right?
Yeah.
But it makes the dating space harder. I'm going to pause there for a minute. What are your initial thoughts on just that reality that a large number of people might be left out of dating preferences based on their weight and size?
My initial thought is my concern for people feeling hopeless as a result of that.
Yeah.
And our goal isn't for that to be the effect of this.
No.
But we do feel like that a lot of people don't talk about it enough.
No. Or the fact that this was a really interesting article I came across. Do you know that it's actually statistically harder to stay thin now compared to how it was in the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they did a study where they did a longitudinal study of people. I think they started with a group in 1970 something, and then in the 90s, right? And they followed them for the same period of time, and they tracked their activity level and their caloric intake and whatever. And when they matched calorie intake and activity level across those two groups, right, effectively netted them out, they found that in the later group was likely to be 10% heavier, regardless.
You know what? That kind of makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get too geeky on nutrient density of fruits and vegetables and stuff like that, but with such mass production of monocultures and the type of fertilizers they're using to produce food that technically grows food.
Yeah.
But the quality of the food that it's growing is less dense in nutrients.
Well, and there's a lot of factors that play into this, right? So, and the authors basically said we need a lot more research to be able to tie a cause to this. So they don't.
Sure. I'm not saying that's the only reason,
No.
but
yeah. So there's that, and the researchers suggested a couple of other things that could be lending this to that trend. One is hormone disruptors in our environment. Some pesticides have been known to do this, but also plastics and chemicals in clothing and food and in cookware have been known to disrupt the hormones that regulate weight. Also, just things, and this wasn't a part of this experiment because they controlled for this, but in terms of the population as a whole, activity level,
Okay.
right? So I was thinking about this the other day, like, you know, in looking at 3 generations of women in my family, right? My grandmother walked to school for most of her life. When she went to work in government, she walked to work, walked up the steps of a multi-story building, and went up and down them frequently throughout the day to do her work, to take stuff to and from offices,
Yeah.
right? She was constantly moving, like it was more convenient to do
They didn't
that.
have electronic anything. It was all hard copy paper.
Yeah. So you went back and forth to
Yeah.
rooms, and you went to shipping rooms, and you did stuff, right? And you walked downtown to go get lunch, and then you walked back to your office.
Yeah.
My mother has maybe a slightly, she's very active because she's a principal at a school where she circles the school constantly, right?
Yeah, putting out fires.
Yeah,
Not physical fires, but
yeah, she gets her steps in really easily. I'm very blessed to have a fantastic job that is in many ways much more comfortable and significantly um, easier in terms of the logistics of it than either of my family members.
yeah.
I work for a software company at home.
Yeah.
I sit, or I could sit, for 8 to 10 hours a day
Yeah.
in a chair.
Now you're doing synchrony, which adds on to that
I
too.
sit for 14 hours a day. No.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's there's as we shift the way that we work and the way that we live, how our cities are laid out, right? Everything changes about how we move our bodies in the world. So there's a lot of factors contributing to this, and we don't have time to dive into it, but there has been good research to show that it is harder these days to stay thin than it used to be,
Yeah.
right? But the cultural demands to be thin have not necessarily changed. And yeah, I think it can feel really difficult for people who are in fatter bodies to look at the landscape and go like, what is it? What is there for me? Right.
Yeah.
Now, generally, when I talk to people, right, I'm gonna illustrate some trends now about the synchrony folks that I've interviewed. When I ask people about body type preferences, the first thing they say is, well, I want someone who's healthy, and I want them to be able to go and do things with me, right? And I push on that because I need to get a better sense of what that means. Because, spoiler alert, you can be healthy and look like a distance runner and have, 5% body fat, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or you can be healthy and be an Olympic shot put athlete
Yeah.
and have 30% body fat or more.
And look like a
right?
truck, but like
Yeah,
not,
but
not
you're
in a demeaning way.
you're in
but
peak physical condition,
Yeah.
right? So body shape and how much fat you carry is not necessarily a direct indicator of health.
Yeah, sure.
And there's good data on that too. I'll drop a link to a book that's really great about that if you have questions. But so what I usually offer people is I give them an athleticism scale, and I say, okay, if 1 is a distance runner, is that person that has almost no fat on their body, lean, mean, just muscle, right? And a 10, I usually say if I'm talking to a man, I'll say this is a woman who's a champion Olympic weightlifter, right? Heavyweight, like she's, a woman with a lot of additional fat on her body, a lot of body mass, right?
Yeah.
And a 5 is, like for a woman, I would say like maybe that's like a softball player aesthetic,
Sure.
right? For a guy, I might say baseball player, and a 10 would be a defensive linebacker in an NFL team,
Yeah.
right? I give them that scale and I say, to what number would you gravitate to in terms of your preferences, right? On average, men aim for probably around.
Can I make a guess?
Make a guess.
3.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
I knew it was going to be that.
On average, men, I would say somewhere between 3 and 5,
Yeah.
depending, right? But closer to
Yeah, I can see it being between 3 and 5.
right,
Well,
closer to the thinner
just
side.
knowing how guy friends think, and yeah.
Where do you think women gravitate to in terms of their preference?
Probably between 6 to 8.
I would say on average is 6.
Okay.
A lot of women will say they like a 5.
Sure,
Just
okay.
very moderate. A significant number of women prefer a larger bodied guy. And
Yeah.
a lot of that has to do with what we call body dimorphism, right? Wanting to see the difference between the female body and the male body. And so most women would like a man whose body is larger than theirs because that connotes a sense of safety.
Yeah,
and
safety, security. And stuff
right.
like
There's
that.
something really romantic about that, I think, in our culture. So lots of women will say, I prefer a guy on the larger side. Some women will say, I'm fine if a guy carries some fat as long as he's healthy.
Yeah.
Or I actually prefer someone who's bulkier or broader, right? Even if that entails some body fat. Um, Also, I will say that women are more likely to prefer men whose bodies are carrying slightly more fat relative to theirs. Women are more likely to be comfortable with a guy who carries more body fat relative to theirs. Men are more likely to be comfortable with a body that carries less body fat relative to theirs. So if I have a very large man, he's likely to be open to dating women who carry body fat,
Yeah.
but would want to see less body fat on their body than on his. Whereas women, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
That's a big stereotype, and there's
Sure.
people that differ across the board.
Oh, of course. I wouldn't call it a stereotype, but
Yeah.
like you're actually dealing with, hundreds of people now. So like you're starting to see
Trends.
trends. So I wouldn't call it a stereotype as much as like in particular the trends you have seen.
Right.
That's what's showing up.
Right. And once again, I want to say that there are people who are outliers on either side, right?
Oh, of course. That's the bell curve.
Right. So there are people who prefer very, very, very lean people.
Yeah.
And people who prefer very, very, very fat people. And that doesn't necessarily correlate to their body. Like, for example, I have met very athletic men, right, who probably on that 1 to 10 body scale would be right at a 4 or 5, who preferred a woman who was an 8 or a 9.
Yeah.
Right. That's what they find beautiful. And that's what they're really attracted to. And frankly, I get excited when that happens because I know that I have people that I can match with them, right? And
Yeah.
it's really exciting.
I'm going to ask a question. How often have you run into people, whether it be guys or girls, who match almost perfectly in terms of their values, the direction they're going, things they enjoy, literally almost a perfect match?
Yeah.
But they find out the other person is slightly overweight or overweight compared to what they were expecting, and then decide to not move forward. How often does that happen?
It happens with some frequency. Specifically, I'm just going to be honest here.
Yeah.
I have never seen that happen where a woman did not want to continue based on the body.
We had one woman.
We had one woman who didn't want to continue based on someone's lack of hair and height. And that's a thing.
I thought it was about body fat.
No.
Okay.
We have had women who have said no to men based on physical characteristics. Although I think that's only happened to me once or twice. I have had probably 3 or 4 times as many instances where guys have said no to either meeting or moving forward with a woman that they matched with because of body size.
And enjoyed the conversation with the ones that
Sometimes,
that did go forward with
or had a good conversation.
Yeah.
And then there are plenty of people who opt not to move forward with someone, and I don't know their core reason why.
Oh, of course.
Right. So that isn't to say like this. I don't want to make these people out to be monsters because they expressed to me that this person wasn't a fit for their physical preferences, and there is nothing wrong with you having a specific physical preference. Right.
Yes.
Human preferences are as diverse as humans, and it is totally fine to prefer what you prefer.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to make people out as bad guys or bad girls for having that as a physical preference.
Right.
We just have seen people say that they really value certain things in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
They really value certain things with family arrangements. There are some situations where like people have really, really difficult home living arrangements or life arrangements or like difficult scenarios in life where a woman or a guy is willing to continue the conversation with that person, knowing the difficulties,
Yeah, challenging circumstances,
very challenging
right?
circumstances,
Unique requirements of the dating
and they
partner.
also happen to have met a lot of the other values.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're like, they're a couple percent body fat percentage off of what I really wanted. So let me try to talk to someone else.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's oversimplifying it, but it does drive me nuts a bit.
Yeah.
When they don't even give it a consideration to go forward with the conversation just for a single 1 hour date.
I agree with you.
Is this worth harping on?
Yeah, it's valuable.
Again, I don't want to make them out to be bad guys. I just want people to give
Right.
people a chance and not be that shallow.
Yeah, and I want to I'm going to play devil's advocate for you for a little bit, right?
Sure.
People feel that if they go out with someone who is fatter than they like, that they won't find them attractive, and that because they don't find them initially attractive, nothing can develop there.
Sure.
That's not true.
Absolutely not.
You know, for some people it might be, but the longer you spend with someone getting to know them, the more opportunity there is for that attractiveness to grow. So that's one assumption people make about people in fatter bodies or bodies that are fatter than they would prefer. And for what it's worth, I usually try to match people's body preference to the degree that I can.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're usually not talking about, if someone prefers someone who's at that 2 on that 1 to 10 scale, I'm not putting them with someone who's at a 9.
Yeah, and that's that's why I'm particularly frustrated. We're not talking about going drastically outside of their preference range.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what's frustrating.
Sure. So the first fallacy that people entertain about dating someone in a fatter body is I will never be attracted to them.
Yeah.
And that's not true. Don't limit yourself and your capability to find attraction in someone.
Yeah.
Right. People can become more attractive and more beautiful to you over time. And fatter bodies can be something that you can treasure even if you and yourself aren't particularly attracted to fat.
Yeah.
Right. It's something that you need to be critical of to make, especially if you have never been married and have never had a lot of exposure to the body of someone of the opposite sex. Don't base your assumptions about whether you can or can't be attracted to someone based on which movie stars you find most attractive.
Yeah,
right?
or pornography.
Or people just out in the world.
Yeah.
So that's one fallacy that if I'm not attracted to them initially, I never will be attracted to them. The other fallacy is that if they're big now, that they will always be big or they will get bigger, right? And realistically, losing body fat is challenging in our culture. It's challenging for all the reasons we just talked about, for why it's challenging to stay thin compared to how it was in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
But everyone has the capacity to make decisions about their body, right?
Absolutely.
I personally do not believe that anyone should try to change their body for another person.
Yeah.
Like if you or I decided to make a big health change or a big change to how we were managing our bodies in order to gain or lose body fat, I would want that to be a decision we made because I wanted it for myself or you wanted it for yourself, right?
I mean, it's the same kind of parallel with salvation, right? You don't want someone to try to go to church for someone else.
Right.
They have to want to go to church because it's something they want. If not, it's not going to be a lasting change in their life. Sure. It's not going to be a lasting impact.
Right.
It's got to be something that they want to do.
Yeah. So the takeaway is I don't think you should ever go out with someone with the hope that they will change their body. Right.
Sorry. Random tie-in with salvation. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a bit of a leap, but we'll give it to you.
No,
right.
But no, it makes sense to my mind.
Yes, it's just a drastically different set of stakes.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't think anyone should date someone who has a fatter body than they would prefer with the intent of convincing them to trim down.
Yeah.
I think that's a recipe for disaster and ruining that person's self-esteem. So,
kind of like the parallel with salvation.
Okay, Steven. So anyway, but I think it's also wrong to assume that somebody who's in a fatter body is always going to be in a fatter body.
Yeah.
People change all the time.
Sure.
Right. Bodies fluctuate over the years, and I think that's worth calling out too. Fat content doesn't directly correlate to health.
No.
And there are lots of studies to support me saying that there are a lot of other factors that go into whether or not somebody is healthy, and just your weight alone or just your BMI, which is a terrible measure of health, um, is not sufficient to tell us like what is healthy and unhealthy about someone's body,
Yeah.
right? So that aside, making assumptions about someone's health or about someone's hygiene based on the amount of fat they have on their body is like making assumptions based on nothing, right? You
Yeah.
don't know about how someone is taking care of their body based on how much fat they have.
Yeah.
Um, and related to that, being in a fatter body does not mean that you are inherently undisciplined or inherently slovenly. Um, in a day and age where food deserts are in most major cities, meaning that there's a geographic area where you cannot find fresh food. All food is fast food or processed food. Weight is heavily correlated with socioeconomics, right?
Yeah.
There are people who can only afford food that is very, very cheap and um, calorically dense, but nutrient depleted.
Yeah.
So there's a socioeconomic component to it. Also, it you know, you are like being able to be involved in sports when you're a kid, being able to eat fresh food that was cooked by a parent in your home, being able to purchase fresh foods that don't, that can't be stored for a long period of time and have those prepared, being able to do things like afford gym memberships, all of those things are socioeconomics. Living in neighborhoods where you can openly jog or do athletic activities outside safely,
Yeah.
like not everybody gets those things
Mm-mm.
in our society. So it's not a great idea to assume that somebody's fat on their body is correlated to just their outlook,
Yeah.
right? There are habits, there are cultural issues, there are, I mean, even like frankly, church culture isn't very kind metabolically to us, right? Like, what
Yeah.
do? We get together, and then as soon as church is over at 9 p.m., we all go out and get fast food. Like,
That's what I've heard very many friends that have come to church and been in church for several years
mm-hmm.
say like all y'all do is hang out at restaurants.
Yeah.
That like it's like we hang out, go to someone's house, hang out, go out to eat.
Right.
And then that's literally the cycle of rotation.
Yeah.
One, that's expensive, and two, not great.
Right. So all this to say is that someone's amount of fat that they carry on their body might not be a result of just their decisions. There are
Yeah.
other factors at play. There's genetics at play. There's environmental factors. There's privilege and socioeconomics. It is a complicated landscape. So if you are a person listening to this who is in a fat body and you feel left out of the dating scene, I want to acknowledge a handful of things. You are not imagining that it is harder.
Yeah.
It is harder. It is not impossible to find someone who values your body the way it is right now without having to change it. There are people out there who, again, human attractiveness is as diverse as humans. Somebody out there is attracted to the body that you have right now or the body that you are trying to cultivate, right? And your body and the amount of fat on your body is not in any way an indicator of your value as a person,
Yeah.
of your personal self-worth, of your level of discipline. It is a part of your environment that you have to work within. What would be your advice to people who maybe are not carrying a lot of extra body fat or who might have an opportunity to date someone who's carrying more fat than they are?
I just had a conversation with someone actually this Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
And he was trying to understand synchrony, and I was telling him how our process works. And I was telling him some of the difficulties we were running into with some things. And he basically said something along the lines of like, I can understand why it would be difficult to meet someone online that you've never met before
Mm-hmm.
and not find them attractive for a host of different reasons. He's like, and why people would want to not continue the conversations.
Sure.
He's like, you don't have any chemistry or whatever, and like you're not attracted to them. I was like, but what is attraction? He's like, well, what do you mean? And he basically said, or no, and I said to him, I was like, what is attraction? He's like, well, thinking someone's beautiful or liking their personality. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I was like, but how can you know anything about the person unless you talk to them? He's like, well, you can think they're beautiful. I was like, well, that's great. But there are people that you're surrounded by every single day that you have acclimated to and been around and love their personality and gotten to know them over years.
Yeah.
And then fallen in love with them in their personality, even though maybe in the beginning you're someone you never would have probably gone for.
Yeah.
And it's about getting to know someone. It's about understanding their personality, understanding who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and falling in love with that person and that individual. So we're running into a new era of dating for the apostolics.
Mm-hmm.
So having this matchmaking service is new. So what I'm saying is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you end up using this matchmaking service or meeting someone online, and maybe right away you're not immediately like drooling over this person physically.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, that sounds weirdly graphic, but like, but you recognize that there's a lot of things about that person you do like,
Yeah.
or like for instance, when we're matching you together, we know that your current life situations this person would be willing to consider.
Yeah. You know
You
that
know,
you've got aligned values.
aligned values. You have aligned ministry directions, right? You have all of these things. Give it a shot.
Yeah.
Give it a shot. Like, and it's for instance, in particular for synchrony, it's an hour of your time.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try.
That's
But in,
yeah.
in but even on the online space,
Mm-hmm.
talk to someone. Talk to see get to know them. If it doesn't work out, it's okay. But what I think people are afraid of is getting stuck in situationships.
I think they're afraid of leading someone on
Yeah,
or themselves getting in a situation that they don't know how to get out of.
that's what I mean. Like they're getting in a spot where they don't want to hurt someone, and they say like, "Oh, I don't want to continue this anymore."
And I really think it's not that they don't want to hurt someone. No, this is me being very Machiavellian. I think that's what we tell ourselves, but
Oh,
honestly,
sure.
I think it's that they don't want to put themselves in an uncomfortable situation where they have to have a hard conversation with
That and
someone.
that's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
Is people don't know how to have hard conversations.
Right. So if you give yourself permission to express openly how your outlook and your attraction to someone changes as you're beginning a relationship, then you can open yourself up to talking to someone who you might not find immediately conventionally attractive,
Yeah.
right? And I'm going to use us as an example. I don't mean to constantly be talking about us, but we are the only married couple that we know as well as we know us.
We are the only married couple in this room.
That's true. Very small sample size of married couples who we have lived with for an extended period of time.
And it's our
one.
podcast, so
Yeah, we get to do what we want. We are fatter than we were when we got married.
yes.
And like, I think I've said this number before. I think I am about 70 pounds fatter than when we got married.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't remember what it was, like 40 or 50, or
Yeah.
45, yeah.
We've gained a significant amount of weight.
Yeah.
Right. You and I have, talked a lot about body fat. And you've watched me go through a whole host of challenges grappling with my body as it's changed. Right?
Yeah.
I had more challenges with my body in the early years of our marriage when I weighed 130 pounds and looked relatively trim, right, than I've had in the last 5 years since our daughter was born and my weight started to really go up. I still have hard body days, you know. But the thing that has kept us through that, as my body's changed, as your body's changed, is that our attraction to each other is not really based on what we look like.
Yeah.
On any given day. And don't get me wrong.
My jawline is less defined.
Don't get me wrong. I love the way you look, right? And there's, I think that you and I could sit here and like talk about each other's physical appearance and give a lot of compliments, but we look different,
Yeah.
right? We look less conventionally attractive. We are more comfortable with each other. I think that we have a deeper bond than we had at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we should just throw out physical appearance and health and all the other things. Like you and I are both working to try to like get into some better habits and
Yeah.
stuff, as
Yeah.
many people probably are at the beginning of this year. And if you're taking steps to make yourself better for you, then good on you.
Yeah. As
But
long as it's in a healthy way.
yeah, but our weight has not been the determining factor of our attraction and how it's changed over time. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot just because you're the only guy in
Oh
the room.
boy.
Sorry. Do you still find my body attractive, 70 pounds heavier than it was when we got married?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I mean,
There's not much more you can say to that. That's
yeah.
PG.
Yeah. I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. And you demonstrate that in like our day-to-day life and
Yeah.
how you treat me. It's not like you're just saying that for the camera.
No, I can't. I can't go into detail.
No.
This is a PG podcast.
Yes. Cool. Okay. Anything else that you think is important for us to say to either folks dating in fatter bodies or people dating folks in fatter bodies?
I do want to reference something that we were talking about earlier, not necessarily advice,
Mm-hmm.
but, and this might be a hard topic for you.
It's okay.
When we first got married and where we are now, like you said, are very two different bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Up until you started going to therapy and
Mm-hmm.
really working on yourself, on trying to rewire your thinking about yourself, you had the same language about yourself at 130 pounds
Yeah.
as you did like post having Lily and starting to gain like
Yeah, 170 pounds at that point, 180 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you were still having that same dialogue.
Yeah. The
And
narrative never
now
changed.
you look back at yourself and go, I was a stick. Like
comparatively speaking.
yeah, I know, but like you're looking back at yourself and like, oh my gosh, I would kill to have that body now. Is what you said.
Yeah.
Is what you used to say. Like, and so what I'm saying is, there's no clear lines of what is a good number for a person in terms of weight.
Right.
You have to be happy with yourself and trying to become healthier.
And I think the crux of it is that tying your self-esteem to a number
Yes.
is never going to be a way to find contentment with yourself.
No, and that's why the lower the number gets, even if you hit that benchmark, some people will still not be satisfied.
Yeah, 100%.
If you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Sure.
And with the statistic back in 2014 of 70% of women wearing a size 14 or higher, right? That is a common occurrence. I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, one, you're beautiful. That's not just to you, but to all the women out there. You're beautiful. And two, like, do it for yourself, not for other people.
Yeah, love your body because it's your body and it's the vessel you have.
Yeah,
right.
And I'm not going to say this in a demeaning way. If you can afford it, counseling is a beautiful thing. Therapy is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, life changing.
So what I'm saying is because there's a lot of stigmas in this world about people with bigger waistlines.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things that you've had to battle your
Yeah.
whole life growing up, specifically for women, that you've had to grow up with, that you've had to rewire in your brain to think about yourself in a more positive way. And I know you're not alone.
No. And another thing to think about in relation to that is that the way that you talk, one of the things that we do as a culture when we are self-conscious about our bodies is we talk about other people's bodies and distance ourselves from that, right? So it's easy to point out the person in the room who is larger or who is this, that, or the other, right? Understand that the language that we use to talk about other people's bodies has an effect on how you see yourself
Yeah.
and how other people see you. There's something that I'd have to go back and search for the article for this. If I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. They were talking about when girls become conscious of their body shape and start to um, experience self-consciousness about their body. And they found that that was happening around the age of 5.
Mm.
And a lot of it had to do with the language that their mothers and other female relatives were using about their bodies.
Yeah.
So if
That
you...
hits hard when us having a 5-year-old daughter,
Right.
you know. Do you have anything you want to add? Advice? It's okay to have big feelings.
Yeah.
So we say to our daughter or our son.
I have a lot of thoughts and feelings. I don't think I have time to like unpack it all here. I think the thing I'll leave people with is that if you happen to be a person in a thin body, you might not understand the challenge that your brothers and sisters who are in fatter bodies go through. Please approach them with grace and with compassion. Our culture is against them in a lot of ways, right? And another thing to think about is that it is possible to love your body when it's larger.
Yeah.
That's something that I've had to learn. Like, I have found more love for my body in terms of its just the fact that it was created by God and everything that it's capable of doing in these last few years when I've been my heaviest. I've found more self-confidence and self-love in those years than I've had in a long time. And I still don't have a perfect relationship with my body. That's a work in progress. But you can cultivate that, and it's worth doing because you deserve to live a life where you're not haunted by your mirror and you don't have to undergo some kind of crazy, rapid, instant TV body transformation for that to happen. Cultivate the love first.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to try to dump as many resources as I can in the show notes in case it's valuable to you. And I would love to hear if this resonates with people. I hope this hasn't been too difficult or
Offensive.
Yeah, or painful for anyone to hear. But I think it's something we have to talk about because it is impacting how we operate in this dating space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else we want to tell people?
Order your sync pins.
Order your sync pins. We are back on track with our mailing process. So if you haven't ordered your sync pin yet, please go do that at the link below. Remember, these are just for apostolic singles to wear in public apostolic spaces so that we can recognize who's looking for.
And if you run or know someone who runs singles events for the Apostolic Faith, please reach out to us because we'd love to send you all these for free.
Yeah.
You can add them into the free bags that you guys give out to people,
put them out
or put them out on a table, or whatever you want to do with them.
Yeah.
As long as they're going to Apostolic Singles.
Yep, absolutely.
That are 21 or older.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is that we are still gathering data for our From Singles to Shepherds survey. As a reminder, we have a podcast episode about this, but this is a survey that we're using to help our pastors and leaders understand the experience of singles and understand the impact of loneliness in the church. The data coming back in this is really challenging and compelling. It's going to be an incredible tool for our pastors. We're about halfway right now to our goal responses. So we're aiming for 1,000 responses if we can, just to get a healthy sample size. So if you haven't taken the survey and you are an apostolic single, please go take it. Please grab the link and go share it in your social media or with your singles groups or with your friends and loved ones who are single. It's going to make a really big difference, I believe, in both how the project is networking with those leaders, but also just in the impact it has on the church.
Yep.
I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you for. Thanks. Anyway, on that note, thank you guys for being part of this with us. I hope you
Yeah.
have a great rest of your week.
Bye.